David Allan Coe had a life that could only be called a storm, loud, unexpected, and full of both greatness and darkness. Even among the criminals of country music, he was a man who stood out. He was someone who broke rules further than anyone else dared. Legendary musicians like Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson were praised for being rebels, but wore his pain like a badge of honor. Painful scars from his childhood affected every song he sang and every choice he made. On his way, he went from being locked up to performing in front of thousands of fans. There were times when he was musically brilliant and times when drugs, loneliness, and bad choices made him feel hopeless. But beneath the rhinestones, tattoos, and bravado, there was a man who was desperate to be accepted and who was plagued by problems that would not leave him. When the music stopped and the life of an outlaw got too heavy to carry, he didn't die in glory or peace. Instead, he died in sadness, loss, and the shadows of a life lived too hard for too long. This is David Allan Coe's sad life story. The crazy and rebellious life of David Allan Coe didn't start on a stage with lots of lights. It started in the dark streets of Akron, Ohio, where people were poor and not cared for. Coe was born in 1939, and his childhood was full of pain, uncertainty, and struggle. He didn't find much comfort in his family life. Instead of love at home, he often found punishment, rejection, and violence. From a very young age, he was known as a boy who caused trouble and didn't fit the social norms. By the time he was a teenager, Coe had been to a lot of different reform schools. Each one was meant to help him change, but all it did was make him more angry at authority. During his time in prison, each stay was longer and harder than the last. Each time he came out, he was more angry and determined to live his life on his own terms. Crime was how he stayed alive. As a child, he got into fights, thefts, and minor crimes, and over time, these small offenses turned into major crimes that put him in jail. He got used to the prison walls as much as the stages he would one day perform on. It was while he was locked up that the ideas for his music started to grow. Coe learned to use his anger and the bad things that happened to him in jail to write songs. His songs were based on real events in his life. He told harsh stories about violence, despair, and a world that tore him apart. These weren't polished Nashville ballads or songs that would do well on the radio. They were honest statements from a place where just making it through the day meant fighting another day. Because he was abused in reform schools, locked up alone, and rejected by society, he was inspired to write books that would one day make him a famous criminal. But when he was young, that fire hurt him and drew him deeper into loops of being punished and rebelling. An important part of his early life was spent in jails in Ohio, some of which were very harsh, and that's where he started to become the tough guy that would stay with him his whole life. David Allan Coe didn't just have a bad childhood. Everything that came after it was built on top of it. His sins and punishments were not chosen at random. They were the only thing that could happen to a boy who had lost his family and was filled with anger and a desire to rebel against a world that had only given him pain. Nashville doesn't like to tell fairy tales about how David Allan Coe went from being a tough prisoner to a singer. It was dirty, risky, and full of paradoxes. By the time he got out of prison in the 1960s, Coe had spent a lot of his youth and early adulthood in jail. He had been there for crimes like car theft, robbery, and others that showed he didn't respect authority and needed to stay alive by any means possible. Prison wasn't just a punishment for him. It was where he became who he is today. He had to deal with anger, shame, and being alone. But inside those walls, he also found a voice that could tell stories that not even the most polished Nashville singer would be brave enough to write down. He started writing song lyrics on bits of paper and making music about surviving, being betrayed, and the pain of being locked up. He didn't get a regular job or try to fit back in with society when he was finally free. His only things with him were his guitar, his songs, and his determination to go to Nashville. At that time, Nashville was a city that had been polished to a high shine. Every note was shaped by producers, and stars played the game to get attention and fame. Coe, on the other hand, was not what the business wanted. He seemed like he would cause trouble. He was acting like a bother. He had tattoos all over his body before they were popular. He wore diamonds and leather to show off, and he spoke like he knew what he was singing about because he had lived those stories. He sang about more than just being in jail. He had lived through it, while others idealized rebellion and lived through it themselves. People couldn't avoid seeing how real he was, even if it scared them. People who work in the field weren't sure what to think of him. He was too rough, too bare, and too hard to call on. Still, his songs were so good that they couldn't be ignored. Strangers started to meet in small clubs and biker bars where he started performing, and word slowly spread about the ex-convict. Record companies finally caught his attention because of his rough voice and fearless stories, but his career was still not easy. The people in power in Nashville never fully accepted him. He caused too much trouble and wasn't willing to negotiate. But that was never the point for Coe. There was no reason for him to be there. He was there to say what he really thought. He called himself a rebel a long time before that word became a catchphrase for products. He wore his time in jail not to show off, but to show that he was real in a business full of fakes. The story of David Allan Coe's journey from jail to musician was not one of redemption. The story was about a man who changed himself over and over, again because he wouldn't be quieted. His voice carried the weight of a life lived outside the rules. As the outlaw country movement grew in the 1970s, artists such as Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and Johnny Paycheck began to question the strict Nashville system. This was the right time for David Allan Coe to rise. But he didn't just put on the outlaw name for image like other people have. He lived it with all of his heart. He had the scars, the felonies, the prison stories, and the heart of a rebel to show it. It didn't take long for Coe to become famous as both a performer and an author of great skill. He wrote hits for other people, but his own songs often shocked and upset the masses. Take This Job and Shove It was a song he wrote that Johnny Paycheck made into a working-class battle cry. Besides his rough exterior, he wrote ballads and stories that showed a softer side. Tanya Tucker recorded Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone, which showed that he could write deeply moving lyrics. Some people who didn't trust him because he was a criminal came to respect him because of these songs. His stage shows were famous for being flashy, dangerous, and hard to guess. Coe would show up in rhinestone suits one night and leather biker gear the next. He would also sometimes wear outfits that made people laugh or shake their heads. He loved breaking rules and making it hard to tell the difference between performance and provocateur. But the fact that he was hard to guess was what made him stand out. Coe stood out from the other artists because he was honest and brave. He would say or sing things that no one else would. Other singers got big with the help of the Outlaw label, but Coe stayed on the edges. Radio stations were hesitant to play his songs, and people in charge in Nashville often didn't like how he looked. He never got the same chances as Waylon or Willie. A lot of it was his own fault. He wouldn't follow the rules or clean up for airplay, and he often made enemies instead of friends. But among people who supported the outlaw movement, he became a folk hero. People liked how honest his voice was and how gritty his songs were. They also liked how every word came from real-life experience. It wasn't a lie that he was a criminal. He was the real deal. People both respected and feared him because he was himself. He didn't fit in with Nashville's standards, and he seemed to like it that way. But as Coe's fame grew in outlaw country, so did the problems. He seemed set on a road that would take him not to the top of fame, but to the bottom of isolation. But for now, David Allan Coe had made a name for himself in country music history as one of the most dangerous, smart, and unexpected bad guys. When David Allan Coe's name got more popular, so did the problems that surrounded him. These problems would define his career for as long as his songs did. Coe leaned into the chaos, while Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings found ways to be rebellious while still being accepted by most people. The Cheyenne. There was no doubt that he was going to break the rules and let everyone know about it. His music, which was already honest and raw, got darker, which surprised reviewers and turned off people who might have become fans. He made a bunch of underground X-rated albums with rude jokes, explicit lyrics, and racially and sexually offensive themes. These albums made him even more unpopular in Nashville and hurt his image in ways that will never go away. Some fans saw these projects as proof that he wasn't afraid of anything, while others saw them as proof that he was hurting himself by not being able or willing to tell the difference between shock value and real talent. Critics called him a pariah and said he was too crazy even for outlaw country. Mainstream radio stations wouldn't play those records. But his singing wasn't the only thing that caused trouble. People often read about Coe's personal life in the wrong way. He had failed marriages, lawsuits, fights with promoters, and feuds with other singers, all of which showed that he liked being in trouble. He often seemed to hurt his own chances of becoming more successful because he chose to stir up trouble instead of following the rules. People praised him for not giving in, but they also blamed him for the relationships he damaged along the way. His tour, which was supposed to bring him steady income and keep his fans alive, turned into another battlefield. Many places were afraid to book him because of his bad image or the wild crowds he drew. Even so, he still found fans at biker events and small clubs and among religious people who thought he was a real outlaw. But as the years went by, the crowds got smaller and the money problems got worse. In the world of criminals, his reputation as the ultimate rebel kept him living, but it kept him from getting the respect that his peers did from the rest of society. In interviews, he often slammed reviewers and the music business, saying that they were to blame for him not getting opportunities. But beneath the bluster, there was a man who had been hurt deeply by rejection. He was different because he was rebellious, but that also meant he would never be accepted for long. It wasn't long before the outlaw movement died out, leaving him all by himself with a reputation so bad that even his friends avoided him. He lost a lot of friends and opportunities because of the trouble he caused in his work, which could have been a lasting legacy. It wasn't a sudden feeling of being alone after that. In the end, only a small group of loyal fans admired Allan Coe, and the world that had once given him a stage turned its back on him. The outlaw country trend had slowed down by the 1990s, and the music business had moved on to newer artists and cleaner sounds. This meant that Allan Coe had fewer chances, stages, and people who were ready to take a chance on him. Some people thought his image as a rebellious persona was out of date, and his reputation for getting into trouble made it even harder for him to get